And if you couldn't tell, it was the last Sunday before Christmas. The pastor's wearing a coat and tie. So Merry Christmas. I don't know how long this gift will last. Anyway, glad that you're here this morning. You recognize that song that they just played as I heard the bells on Christmas Day. Hopefully you know the story behind that. It'll be part of the notes tomorrow that you really, if you don't know the story, you really need to look it up. I'm just going to summarize a little bit this morning. It was written by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow at a very difficult time in his life during the Civil War, and that was just part of the story of things that he had endured. But I encourage you to look up the rest of the story behind that. But in the midst of the Civil War, he writes these words. This is a few of the verses. The cannon thundered in the south, talking about the Civil War clearly. And with the sound, the carols drowned of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And then probably in the most desperate verse, he says, and in despair I bowed my head. There is no peace on earth, I said. For hate is strong and mocks the song of peace on earth, goodwill to men. And those words just drip with the sadness of the heartbreak and the loss in his life, the discouragement of a nation at war with itself, family tragedy. But that's not the last stanza of the poem. His final stanza returns to the hope that we all share for ourselves and for our nation. Then pealed the bells more loud and deep. God is not dead, nor doth he sleep. The wrong shall fail, the right prevail, with peace on earth, goodwill to men. To me, that's one of the most, I guess we'd call that a Christmas carol, but it's one of the most powerful poems, just as he takes you through this dark and discouraging time and then resolves that when it seems that all is wrong in the world and right is nowhere to be seen, he reminds us that the wrong shall fail and right prevail. And what he longed for is what we celebrate today. Peace on earth, goodwill to men. It's a common theme of our Christmas messages and so forth. As we were practicing for worship this morning, I don't know why I'm sharing this. It was just so odd. We're going to sing some carols before we close this morning. And I was getting mental flashbacks of being a young kid in elementary school and practicing for Christmas rehearsal or Christmas programs or whatever as a kid. And in my mind, I just had these images of standing beside a bunch of other kids in these itchy sweaters. And we're practicing some of the songs that we're singing today. You know how sometimes impressions just implant in your mind. And I was transported, just a few years ago when I was in elementary school, back to that idea. And that's one of those themes came through that we're talking about. Peace on earth, goodwill to men is one of the words of one of the songs. But we're gathered here today to celebrate. It's one of probably the most famous holiday around the earth, and what for many of us has been the most discouraging year in a lifetime. I can't remember being more discouraged than in this past year, and you came today in hopes of finding peace to quiet your soul. There's no new words that I can say that you haven't heard before. There's nothing I can say that would inspire happiness and celebration. All I can do is remind us of what we already know, the truths that have remained constant through years of joy and years of loss. And we're all here today in hopes of rekindling some joy. We probably have something planned this week, whether it's a Zoom, whether it's a small family gathering, whatever it may be. We're hoping to enjoy some time celebrating together. But before we leave today, we'll sing a few songs of worship. Worship our King and remember the promise. But first we come to the words of Isaiah 9, which Chris is going to read for us a little later. But verse 2 of Isaiah 9 says this. This is Isaiah's prophecy. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwell in a land of deep darkness, on them has light shone. And the words of one of the carols that we're going to sing today proclaims that, yet in thy dark streets shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. Do you see the commonality between what Longfellow writes and what the words of O Little Town of Bethlehem say? What the words of Isaiah 9 say, for those who walked in darkness, things are not always going to be as they are. The discouragement will not always be there. The reason for the light is in verse 6 of Isaiah 9. For to us a child is born. To us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Verse 7 says, of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end. On the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. It's a verse that we regularly read at Christmas time, but think about how a Jewish person at the time of Christ would have read that with 400 years of nothing, thinking about the prophecy of Isaiah that this Messiah that's going to come is going to be called the Prince of Peace, and of his increase of his government and peace there will be no end, and they're looking forward to that, and here comes Jesus coming into this earth, stepping into that, not as a powerful, majestic king, authorized with earthly authority, but in the form of an innocent little child born in a barn, in a manger. What a contrast in what they were expecting. But the prophecy of Isaiah and the promise of the Levitical blessing, which we've been talking about, are both fulfilled in the person of Jesus the Messiah, even as the ultimate fulfillment of that is still yet to come. If Christ was already fulfilled completely for everything that we've talked about and been promised from Scripture, we would already have recognized eternal peace. And I think you would agree that we're not there yet. For a few weeks now, we've been applying the blessing from the book of Numbers, chapter 6, to the Christmas story. And today we come to the last phrase of the blessing, and give you peace. The promise goes along with the other parts of the blessing. Our request for God to bless us and keep us, to make his face shine upon us and be gracious to us, turn his face toward us, and it ends with, and give you peace. In today's troubled world, God turning his face toward his people is one of the greatest gifts we could ever receive. We're going to take some time today to turn our eyes toward him and receive and remember the gift he has given. As I began to study the blessing from Leviticus, what was common, maybe you've even seen it depending on how many churches and pastors you've been around, is the priest would raise his hand up over the people to give them the blessing, to signify the direction that blessing was to fall. For example, if I turn my back to you and blessed the Christmas tree behind me, you don't feel very empowered. You don't feel that prayer, that blessing is sincere or directed towards you. But his hands would encompass the direction that blessing is to fall. And it's almost as if, in a messianic prophetic way, in Bethlehem on that silent night, God blessed his hands around the earth and prayed a blessing. Brothers and sisters, God the Father has raised his hands of blessing over you, whether you realize that or not. He sent his Son into the midst of our sin to restore us and bring us to peace with him. Peace in a troubled world is a distinctive aspect of the Christian life. Some have said that the light shines brighter in the darkness. And I certainly hope that's true as we experience this difficult year of 2020. Jesus said that we would have trouble, but fear not, he has overcome it. I saw another tweet this week that reminded me of the power of this message. It said this: the Christian life is not marked by the absence of problems. And God's people said, amen, we have our problems, right? We're not perfect. But it should be marked by the presence of peace. In the midst of our difficulty and our troubles and our turmoil, we still have peace. Well, how is that even possible? Because of the promise of Isaiah, the Prince of Peace. I was watching a church service online a few weeks ago, and the pastor was going around the room. It was kind of a small gathering as well, and the pastor asked the people what brings them peace, and they would answer different things. Walk in the woods, quiet time in a dark room, or prayer time, or whatever. And he said something that I thought, that's probably a lot of truth in that I should point that out to us. He said, peace is not merely the absence of war. It's not merely the absence of something. Conflict, unease, whatever it may be. But think about it. We haven't had any wars in 2020 that I know of, and it's still not a peaceful year. We wouldn't describe it that way. Peace is not merely the absence of something. It is the presence of the Prince of Peace. As we just read in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6. Isaiah also says in chapter 26, verse 3, that you keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. Perhaps the reason that we can't experience peace is where our minds have become distracted. I am overwhelmed. Not overwhelmed is not the right word, but not shocked either. I'm saddened, I guess would be the word, that as I go through every day, I realize how much entertainment and blah we are given. How much opportunity we have for more information, for more distraction, for more turmoil and conflict. I was flipping through, I think it was Twitter this week, and I've highly filtered what my feeds are. I want to be encouraged. I want to hear some words from the Lord. And as I was going through there, they just did the context, the conversation just degenerated into a back and forth arguing about something. I had to flip my phone off. It's like the amount of times I've had to use my own discernment to say, I'm not going to be a part of that. I don't have time for that. And I know that's not just me. It's not just one social media platform. It's constantly surrounding us, the division and the backbiting and the backstabbing, not just outside the church, but inside the church as well. It's because we have not kept our minds stayed on the Prince of Peace. We're distracted by all the conversations, by the entertainment, by the opportunities. Peace is not achieved through our efforts, but through our faith. This year, our faith has hopefully been challenged and hopefully strengthened and stretched. I know this. Tanya and I were having a conversation about the church, and I think I was expressing that same idea to her one time about just the term. And it's not even within an individual church. It's the social media platforms have allowed people from all over the world to give their opinions about things. People who call themselves servants and children of God and just try to destroy each other with words. And I was expressing that to her, how frustrating that is. And as I talk about our faith being challenged and strengthened and stretched, I think that's one of the things that we have to do is be discerning about how we engage in those things. We can't be a light in the world if we look just as dark as everyone else. If we don't have a Prince of Peace, if there's not a source of peace within us, that's what happens if our eyes are not fixed on the Prince of Peace. We become no light at all, just like everyone else in the world, nothing appealing. As we begin to think about the disturbance in our world, the unease, the unrest, I know it's not just me, but I was reminded of the words of the Apostle Paul as he challenged the church of Ephesus. And he told them how to build themselves up with the armor of God. You probably remember that in Ephesians chapter 6. He said this in verse 13. Therefore, put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground, and after you have done everything to stand. Now he goes on and he lists, the armor of God, the sword, the breastplate of righteousness, and all the other things that he lists there. But that is the verse that always ticks in my mind. Because what is Paul asking for in that verse? It says, therefore, when you put on the full armor of God, when you have set your mind on the Prince of Peace, that will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. You've got the armor on. You're fully prepared for battle. What is he expecting you to do? He says someday, so when the day of evil comes, we've all been in those days when we're overwhelmed. We feel the power of evil is greater than any peace or light that we can bring to it. What does Paul ask us to do in that moment? So that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything, when you've got nothing left to give, if you've got on the armor of God and your mind is on the Prince of Peace, just stand. Just stand. There are days when we feel, as children of God, we want to advance His kingdom. We want to see the good news brought to the world. But there's sometimes when it feels the evil is so powerful and the darkness so strong that it takes everything we can do to stand. I would suggest in those moments, do two things. Make sure your armor is on and your mind is fixed on the Prince of Peace. Don't be distracted by all the things that the world has to offer us and attack us with. You see, Paul has high hopes here in Ephesians for the people of God, but he also realizes that there are days when it seems that the battle is too great for us. Paul says, on the days of overwhelming evil, of unbearable burdens, that you may be able to stand your ground. And after you've done everything to stand, after you've fought the good fight, just stand. Be one that is left standing when all the others have fallen. Reminded me of there's a worship song from the 90s it's called "When All Around Has Fallen" is the first line. And ultimately we just, to renew and to rebuild our hope, we just stand and let the glory of God shine on us and His peace work through us. There's no battle for you today, just stand. Let God fight the battle for you. If His gospel is peace, as the song "O Holy Night" says, those who have received His peace must be the peacemakers, sharing His news and His peace with the world, both in word and in deed, but they also must be standing. You've probably heard this before, but Jesus was born near the beginning of what was called Pax Romana, or the Peace of Rome. Now, we know that the Roman Empire was one of the most powerful empires to ever, and one of the largest to ever be on the face of the earth. And the Peace of Rome, that time was about a 200-year time period where Roman rule and Roman power was so strong that there were really no threats. No invaders were threatening the land. And we know that that's who was in power when Jesus was born, was the Empire of Rome. And because it was so relatively peaceful and in not war terms, there was a lot of opportunities. The Romans began to make roads, began to pave and make it easier to travel from one city to another. The Greek Empire had already come and gone. One of the things that's amazing about the Greek Empire is everybody spoke Greek. It's part of our New Testament is written in Greek. So not only can you get from one city to another, when you get there you can speak the language or a common language of the person who's there. It was safe to travel. You remember Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan and what happened to him as he was traveling on the road. Some bandits came and beat him up and robbed him, right? During the Pax Romana, travel was more safe. Trade and commerce was widespread. There was great opportunity to make money. And into this relatively peaceful, roads improving, safe to travel, commerce growing, God says, I'm going to send the Prince of Peace into this to enhance the spread of this message so it can go as quickly as possible. It was the perfect time to bring about a gospel of peace, as the carol says. We're going to worship in just a moment, but I wanted to read you one of the stanzas from the song, O Holy Night. This is the song that says His gospel is peace. O holy night, the stars are brightly shining. It is the night of the dear Savior's birth. Long lay the world in sin and error pining, till He appeared and the soul felt its worth. A thrill of hope, the weary world rejoices. For yonder breaks a new and glorious morn. This is the promise of the Prince of Peace. What was a holy night bloomed and blossomed into a world-changing good news message for the entire world. On roads that were easy to travel, in a language that everybody spoke. And we sit here today as descendants of that faith, with the same promise, the same hope of peace, believing in the same Messiah who was born in Bethlehem. Worship team, would you come up this morning? So I wanted us to worship together this morning to remind ourselves of this contrast that we've seen in the words of Longfellow and the prophecy of Isaiah chapter 9. There's a worship song that we sing fairly regularly that kind of hits on these themes, and you'll recognize it as simple. It calls for a response on your part when we sing it. So would you stand with me this morning as we worship together and share the idea of a broken world being healed and brought to peace. Do you feel the world is broken? Do you feel the shadows deepen? But do you know that all the dark won't stop the light from getting through? Do you wish that you could see it all made new? We do. creation groaning? Is a new creation coming? Is the glory of the Lord to be the light within our midst? Is it good that we remind ourselves of this? Is anyone worthy? Is anyone whole? Is anyone able to break the seal and open the scroll? The Lion of Judah, who conquered the grave, he is David's root and the Lamb who died to ransom the slave. Is he worthy? Is he worthy of all blessing and honor and glory? Is he worthy of this? He is. Does the Father truly love us? Does the Spirit move among us? And does Jesus, our Messiah, hold forever those he loves? Does our God intend to dwell again with us? I want to sing that last question to you one more time, because I wanted this to lead us into our time of Christmas worship. As this song says, when we emerge from the darkness, and because we believe that there is hope on the other side, it's only because the Prince of Peace is among us. Let me ask you that question one more time. Does our God intend to dwell again with us? He does. Captive Israel that mourns in lonely exile here until the Son of God appear. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come thou day spring, come and cheer our spirits by thine advent here. Disperse the gloomy clouds of night, and death's dark shadows put to flight. Rejoice, rejoice, Emmanuel shall come to thee, O Israel. O come, desire of nations, bind in one the hearts of all mankind. Bid thou our sad division cease, and be thyself our King of peace. Rejoice, seated.
Our scripture reading is Isaiah chapter 9, verses 2 through 7. The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. A light has dawned on those living in the land of darkness. You have enlarged the nation and increased its joy. The people have rejoiced before you as they rejoice at harvest time and as they rejoice when dividing spoils. For you have shattered their oppressive yoke and the rod on their shoulders, the staff of their oppressor, just as you did on the day of Midian. For every trampling boot of war and the bloodied garments of war will be burned as fuel for the fire. For a child will be born for us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders. He will be named Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. The dominion will be vast, and its prosperity will never end. He will reign on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish and sustain it with justice and righteousness from now on and forever. The zeal of the Lord of armies will accomplish this.
What child is this who laid to rest on Mary's lap is sleeping, whom angels greet with anthems sweet, while shepherds watch our keeping. This is Christ the King, whom shepherds guard and angels sing. Haste, haste to bring him, Lord, the babe, the Son of Mary. Why lies he in such mean estate, where ox and ass are feeding? Good Christian, fear, for sinners hear the silent word is pleading. Nails, spears shall pierce him through, the cross be borne for me, for you. Hail, hail the Word made flesh, the babe, the Son of Mary. So bring him incense, gold, and myrrh, come peasant king to own him, the King of kings, salvation brings. Let loving hearts enthrone him. Raise, raise the song on high, the Virgin sings her lullaby. Joy, joy, for Christ is born. thy dark streets shineth the everlasting light. The hopes and fears of all the years are met in thee tonight. How silently the wondrous gift is given. So God imparts to human hearts the blessing